9:47 on a Tuesday morning, Reed Halloran set 3 stacks of cash on the table, $300,000 in counted bills, the rubber bands 4 years old and never untied. Della Pruitt looked at the money, looked up at the man in the flannel shirt with sawdust on his sleeves, closed the folder, pushed it across the table. Not approved. Credit score 547. Don't waste the bank's time again. The marble lobby caught the number. A mother pulled her child to the side. Reed did not move. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said one sentence. "Do you know who pays your salary this month?" Della went still. 17 minutes later, Garrett Wexley's phone rang on the 8th floor. 3 weeks before that morning, Reed had opened a letter at his workshop on Haywood Road. The landlord was doubling the rent on the lot, 60 days to buy the parcel outright at $340,000 or vacate. The letter had been hand-delivered, not mailed. That detail bothered him more than the number. Reed had $300,000 saved from cabinet work, untouched, kept in a steel lockbox bolted to the floor, joists under the workshop floorboards. He needed $40,000 more. The math was simple. Getting the math approved by a bank was the problem. His mornings were a routine he had built deliberately. Up at 5:30, coffee on the stove, black, no sugar. Vera's lunch packed in a tin box peanut butter, an apple, a folded napkin with a pencil drawing on the back. The 8-year-old was waiting at the door by 6:45, her mother's old sketchbook tucked under one arm. He drove her to the elementary school in West Asheville and opened the workshop at 7:30. Halloran Cabinetry had a 6-month waiting list. Custom kitchen pieces, bookshelves, the occasional dining table built from salvaged barn wood. Slow work, expensive work. Work that meant something to the people who ordered it and to the man who built it. 2 regulars came by that week. Iris ran an independent bookstore on Lexington and had ordered a walnut counter for her register. Ben was a retired teacher who needed a new bookcase for his late wife's poetry collection. Neither knew anything about Reed's past. They knew he was the best craftsman in the county, and that was enough for them. Vera worked silently in the corner most afternoons. She had not spoken much since Margaret died 2 years ago. She drew, she watched, she understood more than she said. That night on the porch above the French Broad River, she handed her father a folded square of paper without a word. It was a sketch in Margaret's hand, a small studio room with a tall window facing the water, a drafting desk, a chair the right size for a child. Reed held the paper for a long time. He recognized the handwriting in the margins. Margaret had always written in that small, careful print, even on grocery lists. "I'll keep the workshop, baby," he said quietly. "I promised your mother." That night he filled out a loan application online. Blue Ridge Heritage Bank was the only local lender still writing small business loans in the region. He typed in the credit score he remembered from 2 years ago, 782. He had also seen the Blue Ridge logo somewhere recently in a quarterly report from his patent attorney, 2 pages deep, in a list of licensees. The Halloran Vay Protocol had been licensed to 23 financial institutions since 2017. Reed did not track which ones. He filed the thought away and clicked Submit. On the 8th floor of the Blue Ridge building downtown, Garrett Wexley signed off on a planning map for a development called Riverside Crossing. 6 lots circled in red along the French Broad. 5 already acquired. The 6th was the workshop on Haywood Road. Total project value, $87 million. Lead investor, Bradford Hines of Charlotte, the same name. Della Pruitt had refused to approve an $8.7 million loan for 18 months earlier. Wexley called a young underwriter named Caleb Banks into his office and shut the door. "The Halloran file. I need it flagged. All 3 bureaus. Within the week. Are we clear?" Caleb did not answer right away. Wexley repeated the question. Caleb said yes. On Monday morning, Della was handed a stack of high-risk loan applications to review. The Halloran file sat on top. Credit score 547. She skimmed it once, ready to sign the denial, and then stopped. Something did not fit. A 235-point drop in 8 days was almost statistically impossible without intervention. She signed the denial anyway. It was protocol, but she folded the folder very slowly, and she did not put it in the outgoing tray. The morning after the lobby, Della could not focus. She had reviewed thousands of files in her career. She had denied loans before. None of them had ever followed her home. The man's question kept replaying. Do you know who pays your salary this month? It had not been a threat. It had not been an insult. It had been a question, asked the way an engineer asks a question to test whether the answer was already known. She opened her laptop and pulled up the bank's internal vendor and licensing system. She typed in Halloran. One result, MV Holdings LLC Technology Licensing Partner, contract signed October 2024, valued at $12.4 million per year over 7 years. Authorized signatory, Reed Halloran. Della sat very still for 5 minutes. She read the contract header 3 times to be sure. Then she understood, in one moment, exactly why he had asked. She called Pearl Dawson down to her office. Pearl was 61, gray hair cut short, 28 years at the bank. She set her coffee cup down on the desk slowly, the way a person sets down something fragile. Della asked the question directly. Where did this 547 come from, and do you know MV Holdings? Pearl was quiet for a few seconds. She closed the office door behind her before she answered. I have worked at this bank for 28 years, she said. I have never seen a file flagged at all 3 bureaus inside 8 days. That is not a natural error. As for MV Holdings, I worked with Mr. Halloran's wife, Margaret. She opened a small business account here in 2018. She mentioned her husband worked in security in Boston, some kind of protocol. I did not press her at the time. I looked it up this morning. The Halloran-Vey protocol runs the entire transaction encryption layer of this bank. Every wire we send, every settlement we clear. You just denied a $40,000 loan to the man who keeps us functional. Della opened a browser and typed in Halloran-Vey protocol. The first result loaded. Sentinel Cryptography, 2017. Co-inventors Reed Halloran, MIT class of 2008, and Henrietta Vey, Stanford class of 2009. Patent licensed to 23 financial institutions across North America, including the Federal Reserve's settlement layer. Pearl stood and stopped at the door. Miss Pruitt, I cannot help you publicly. My son is in radiation therapy. The bank's insurance is the only thing holding us together right now. But you asked the right question. I will point you to the right places. Della requested raw data from all 3 credit bureaus through the formal audit channel, citing routine internal review. That afternoon, she drove out to West Asheville. She stood outside Halloran Cabinetry for 10 minutes before she went in. The workshop smelled of cedar and linseed oil. Reed was sanding a cabinet door, the long, even strokes of someone who had done it 10,000 times. Vera was drawing on a wooden chair in the corner, knees pulled up. He looked up. There was no surprise in his face, no defensiveness, only stillness. Miss Pruitt, I am not here as the bank, Della said. I am here to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. Reed glanced at Vera, motioned for her to go inside. She went without a word. He turned back. You did something you did not have to do. You read my file a second time. Ask. Reed invited her into the small office at the back of the workshop. He poured 2 black coffees from a thermos. The office had one window, looking out at a stack of red oak boards drying in the sun. Vera went into the main house without a word, taking her sketchbook with her. Della set the question on the table. The thing you said in the lobby yesterday, did you know Blue Ridge Heritage had licensed your technology? Reed took 5 seconds before he answered. He set his coffee cup down, lined the handle parallel to the edge of the desk. I knew 23 banks had signed since 2017. I did not track them by name. When I filed the application last week, I did see a Blue Ridge logo somewhere in the licensing portfolio last month, in a quarterly report from my patent attorney. 2 pages deep. I did not think about it again. Yesterday in the lobby, when you pushed the folder across and said the number, I did not say what I said to threaten you. I said it because I wanted to see if you knew. The answer was that you did not know, which told me something else. It told me whoever pulled my file had not bothered to cross-check against the licensing partners, which meant they were not careful, which meant they were rushed, which meant something. He explained MV Holdings carefully. The structure was deliberate, completely separate from his personal life. The licensing income flowed into an irrevocable trust for Vera, locked until her 25th birthday. He had not touched a dollar of it. He lived on workshop income. The $300,000 on the table had been saved over 4 years. The rubber bands had been wrapped around the bills by Margaret in July of 2020, 3 weeks before her stage 3 diagnosis. He had never untied them. Why? Della asked. Because when Margaret got sick, I spent every personal dollar I had on experimental treatment. Boston, Houston, a clinic in Switzerland. None of it worked. I learned that money does not buy what I needed. When she died, I made a decision. Vera would grow up never having to ask anyone for anything, but she would also never see her father use money to win an argument. Those two things I keep separate. Della understood now why a 547 was even possible to produce. Reed had no recent personal credit activity, no cards, no loans. The score sat on stale data, easy to push down with phantom inquiries. She asked him why he had not named MV Holdings in the lobby. Because I did not want this workshop saved because of who I used to be. I wanted it saved because the file deserved approval on its own. If I had said I owned MV Holdings, you would have approved that loan in 30 seconds. That is not justice. That is power. Della felt something shift in her, not pity, but the quieter recognition of a man who had refused to use leverage he held. I am going to investigate why your file was flagged, she said. Not because of who you are, because that should never happen to anyone, but I need your permission to open a formal internal review, and I will not mention MV Holdings. Agreed, Reed said. On one condition. If you find the person behind this, you do not protect me from the consequences. I will handle that part myself. She nodded. Vera came back in and held out a drawing, a small house with a tall window facing a river. Della took the paper carefully with both hands. Reed watched his daughter. Vera had not given a drawing to a stranger since her mother died. Della drove home and pulled over near Bowen Bridge. She opened the Halloran folder on the passenger seat. In the margin, she wrote Garrett Wexley with a question mark beside it. Then she remembered something else. Bradford Hines, Charlotte. The $8.7 million loan she had refused 18 months earlier. She wrote that name too, drew a line between them. The raw data from the credit bureaus arrived 3 days later, packaged in a plain manila envelope marked routine audit, no return address. Della spread the printouts across her office floor and traced the timestamps backward. 3 hard inquiries logged against Reed's file inside an 8-day window. All 3 came from limited liability companies registered in Delaware. None of them had real operating histories. Shell entities set up for one purpose. The names were generic enough to slip past Automated Review, Crestline Capital Services, Apex Lending Group, North Star Financial Holdings. She brought Pearl in again. Pearl found the technical thread. The 3 LLCs had been registered using the same originating IP address. That address resolved to a network range on the 8th floor of the bank's headquarters. Garrett Wexley's office. The technical evidence was not enough on its own. Della needed motive. She started pulling everything publicly available on Riverside Crossing. Wexley Holdings owned 5 contiguous parcels along the French Broad. The 6th, the workshop lot, was not in the public portfolio. But Della found an internal memo from August 2024 that referred to the Haywood lot as the final target asset. The memo was unsigned but bore Wexley's calendar reference number in the header. While she dug, Reed started to feel the pressure outside. The landlord called 3 times in 1 week, claiming another buyer was offering more. A building inspector showed up at the workshop for what he called a routine check and wrote 2 minor violations, one for the electrical panel, one for an emergency exit sign. The fines were small. The pattern was not. Reed understood. They were trying to push him out before the loan question was settled. He fixed both violations the next morning. He did not tell Della. He had promised to handle his own part. They met for the second time at a small coffee shop in the River Arts District. Della laid the IP evidence and the Riverside Crossing memo on the table. Reed looked at the papers for a long time without speaking. He read the IP timestamps twice. I could end this in a phone call, he said eventually. 1 email from my attorney to the Sentinel board, and Wexley would lose his seat in 48 hours. But if I do that, I confirm what he already thinks of me, that this is a fight between rich people. and Vera grows up watching her father shut someone down with money. I cannot do that. Then we go through the institution, Della said. I open a formal internal review. I report directly to the CCO, not through Wexley. It is slower. But if we win that way, the bank corrects itself. That is what holds. Reed agreed. For the first time in many years, he allowed someone outside the line he had drawn around himself to cross it. When they left the coffee shop, it had started to rain lightly. Della handed Reed her umbrella, said she had another in the car. She did not. Reed noticed, but said nothing. He held the umbrella over her until she reached her car door, then walked back to his truck through the rain. She watched him in the rearview mirror and did not pull away until he had reached his door. Della reported up to Ramona Vance, the chief compliance officer. Ramona was 50, 22 years at the bank, not part of the Wexley faction. She had a reputation for two things: long silences and short final sentences. She listened. She read the IP file. She was quiet for a long time before she spoke. Miss Pruitt, you have 30 days. After that, I have to report to the board regardless of where you stand. And if you are wrong about a single detail, you will be the one who loses your job. Della accepted. She started gathering corroborating testimony. Caleb Banks, the young underwriter Wexley had pressed, was scared. He refused to put anything in writing. His hands shook when Della laid the LLC names in front of him. She gave him a week to think. Reed kept the workshop running. He finished the walnut counter for Iris. She came to pick it up and looked at him carefully across the loaded tailgate. You look more tired than last week. Anything wrong? Everything is being sorted out, Reed said. Iris did not press. She had been a customer of his for 6 years and had learned the shape of his silences. She paid in cash, helped him load the counter into her van, and drove off without another question. Ben came by an hour later for a hinge repair. He stayed for 40 minutes drinking coffee and talking about a cardinal that had built a nest in his porch eaves. Reed let him talk. He found that having Ben in the workshop steadied him in a way he could not have explained. Vera began to ask about Della more. Is she coming to the house, Dad? Reed did not know how to answer. He saw that his daughter was watching something he had not yet named for himself. One night, Vera left a 4th place at the dinner table without explanation. Reed did not move it. He did not say anything either. Della and Reed met for the 3rd time at his house, on the porch above the French Broad, after Vera had gone to sleep. She had come with a bottle of bourbon she had not opened, and a folder of paperwork she did not get around to opening either. For the first time, Reed talked about Margaret, about the diagnosis, stage 3, pancreatic, 14 months of treatment. About the decision to leave Boston. Margaret had wanted to die in the mountains, not in a hospital. About the night she died, Reed holding her hand, Vera asleep in the next room, the heater clicking on at 3 in the morning. Della talked about Charlotte, about Bradford Hines, the $8.7 million loan she had refused to approve because the supporting documentation was fabricated invoices for a logistics company that had no employees and no warehouses, only a leased mail drop in Atlanta. The reassignment that came 3 weeks later, framed as a rotational development opportunity. She had not known until this week that Hines was a Wexley partner. 2 pieces fell into place at the same time. Wexley had not just been targeting Reed for the workshop lot. Hines had warned Wexley about a vice president in Charlotte who was making things difficult. Wexley had requested Della's transfer to Asheville to keep her closer, where he could watch her. She had not been punished. She had been contained. I came to Asheville thinking this was the end of the line, Della said. It turns out this was where I was placed, so I could not cause trouble. Wexley did not know I would meet you. Reed did not answer. He poured her another cup of coffee. They sat without speaking for a while. The river moved below them. The lights of downtown Asheville flickered in the distance. Della left at 11. Reed stood on the porch and watched her car cross the Bowen Bridge until the tail lights disappeared into the dark. The audit reached its 3rd week. Della had the IP trail, the timeline of the 3 phantom inquiries, Caleb's verbal account, and the Riverside Crossing memo. What she did not have was direct evidence that Wexley had personally targeted Reed, not just the Haywood lot. Without that, the board could write off the credit manipulation as a low-level mistake by an overzealous underwriter, and Wexley would survive. Pearl Dawson appeared at Della's office at 6:40 in the evening, after hours. She closed the door behind her. She set a thick folder on the desk. Her hands were trembling slightly. "I have been keeping this since 2021, Pearl said. "Back then I processed the financing application for Wexley Holdings on the original Riverside Crossing project before they renamed it. I saw the planning map. 6 lots, 5 already secured. The 6th was the workshop on Haywood Road. The lot was still owned by the previous owner at the time, but Wexley had a plan to push that owner to sell to Mr. Halloran in 2020 at an inflated price because Wexley knew Halloran would not have the capital to purchase the land outright 4 years later when the rent was raised. The whole thing was engineered 4 years ago. The loan denial this week was not an accident. It was the last step of a plan that has been in motion since 2020, Pearl continued. I kept the folder because I had doubts at the time, but my son had just been diagnosed. I could not lose my job. I have been silent for 4 years. She wept quietly, not from fear but from shame. Della took her hand. You do not need to apologize. You are speaking now. That is what matters. The folder contained the original Riverside Crossing planning map from 2021 with the workshop lot circled in red. Wexley's handwritten notes about pushing the previous owner to sell to Halloran at 40% above market value, so that 4 years later Halloran would not have the capital to buy the land when the rent was raised. And a draft contract between Wexley Holdings and Hines Capital, dated September 2024, valuing the workshop lot at $1.8 million after the removal of the current owner. Della called Reed that night at 10:15. She did not say much. I need you in my office tomorrow morning. Everything is ready. Reed arrived the next morning at 8. Della handed him the Pearl folder. He read it slowly, page by page. When he reached the sheet with Wexley's handwritten notes from 2020, the line about pushing the price up so Halloran would collapse 4 years later, Reed set his hand flat on the desk. It was the first time Della had seen him truly angry. Not loud, not visible to anyone who did not know him. But the temperature of the room changed. He picked me in 2020, Reed said, before Margaret died, before I left Boston. He spent 4 years engineering this for that lot. He did not know who I was. He just knew I was the person who bought a piece of land at the wrong moment. And that is somehow worse, because it means I was interchangeable to him. Anyone would have done. Reed pulled out his phone and called Henrietta Vey in Boston. Della heard him speak one quiet sentence into the receiver. Henrietta, prepare the termination notice for the Blue Ridge Heritage license. Do not send it. Just have it ready. I need it on the desk by Monday morning, and bring yourself with it. The emergency board meeting was called for Monday morning, 8th floor, 11 board members. Garrett Wexley sat at the head of the table in a gray suit, unaware of what was about to happen. Ramona Vance stood at the far end and presented the audit report. She read each piece in sequence. The IP evidence on the 3 phantom inquiries, Caleb Banks's signed sworn statement, executed that morning after Della arranged formal legal protection through outside counsel. The Riverside Crossing memo from 2021 with the workshop lot circled in red, Wexley's handwritten planning notes from 2020, the draft Wexley-Hines contract from September 2024. The room was silent. Pendergast, the 70-year-old co-founder, took off his glasses and set them on the table. 2 other board members exchanged a look without moving their heads. Wexley pushed back. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. This is fabricated. A new hire trying to climb. The IP evidence could be falsified. Caleb is lying to save his job. Pearl Dawson has held a grudge against me since the 2015 restructuring. This is character assassination dressed as compliance work. The door opened. Reed Halloran walked in. Henrietta Vey followed him, a leather portfolio under one arm. The room turned. Reed passed by where Della was standing at the back wall, paused for half a second, and spoke quietly enough that only she heard him. You asked the right question in the lobby last week. I owe you the answer. Della did not speak. She nodded. Henrietta laid a document on the table in front of Pendergast. Members of the board, I represent MV Holdings LLC, the licensing entity for the Halloran Vey Protocol that Blue Ridge Heritage Bank executed in October of last year. Contract value, $12.4 million per year over 7 years. Owner of 51% of MV Holdings. Mr. Reed Halloran, present here today. The room turned to Reed. Wexley's color drained for the first time in the meeting. Henrietta continued. Under Section 14.3, MV Holdings reserves the right to terminate this license unilaterally within 30 days upon evidence of fraud or conflict of interest by the counterparty. Mr. Wexley's actions targeting Mr. Halloran personally over 4 years meet that threshold. The termination notice is drafted and signed. It is in this folder. It does not require a court order. It requires only my client's instruction. Reed spoke for the first time in the room. I did not come here to threaten this bank. I came here to make one thing clear. I have lived in Asheville for 4 years. I build cabinets. I take my daughter to school. I did not tell anyone who I used to be because I did not want that life. When you denied my $40,000 loan last week, you were not denying a carpenter. You did it because someone in this room engineered a plan 4 years ago to take my workshop before my wife was even gone. I do not want this bank to fail. 200 employees here had nothing to do with this, so I will not send the termination notice on one condition. Mr. Wexley resigns within 24 hours. The board reports the matter to the SEC and the North Carolina Banking Commission. Caleb Banks and Pearl Dawson receive formal legal protection. That is the condition. The board voted, 9 in favor, 1 against Wexley, 1 abstention. Wexley resigned within 24 hours. The reports went to the SEC and the Banking Commission within the week. Della stood at the back of the room the entire time. She had not spoken. As the others filed out, Reed stopped beside her. "Thank you for not skipping past my file. That was my job," Della said. Reed looked at her a moment longer than necessary. "No, it was the job you chose to do." 2 weeks after the board meeting, Wexley was gone. His name had been quietly stripped from the building directory. He was facing an SEC investigation for credit reporting, manipulation, and conflict of interest. Bradford Hines was indicted in Charlotte on parallel charges, including wire fraud. Marlena Hooper, the interim CFO, was running the bank. Pearl Dawson was promoted to senior compliance manager. More importantly, her family's health insurance was upgraded to the highest tier available, covering the full cost of her son's ongoing treatment with no cap. Pearl had sat in her office for an hour after she got the news. The door closed before she went back to work. Caleb Banks kept his position and was reassigned to Della's team. He had asked for the transfer himself. Della was offered the position of Senior Vice President of Credit for the Carolinas region. The offer included a relocation package back to Charlotte. She had not formally answered yet. Reed received a letter from the bank. The $40,000 loan was approved at the most favorable rate available. A formal apology was attached, signed by every member of the new board. Reed did not frame the letter. He put it in a drawer with Margaret's old folders, beside the sketchbook page Vera had handed him on the porch. He closed on the workshop lot the following Tuesday. The signing took place at a local attorney's office on Patton Avenue, quiet, no press. The lawyer's golden retriever asleep under the desk. Iris and Ben came by the workshop afterward with a bottle of red wine and a fresh loaf of bread from the bakery on Haywood. Vera began drawing more. One evening she handed Reed a picture of 3 people, a man, a small girl, and a woman with long hair standing beside them. Reed asked gently, "Who is this baby?" "Guess," Vera said. Reed did not guess. He just held his daughter for a long time. Della and Reed met again at the coffee shop in the River Arts District, this time not for business. She arrived first. She had taken the table by the window. Della asked the first question after he sat down, "Why did you keep the Halloran V patent if you did not need the money?" Reed took a long time to answer. "Because when Margaret was sick, no amount of money bought more time. I kept the patent because if Vera ever needed something money could buy, I did not want her to have to ask anyone, and because I thought if I never touched that money, maybe I was keeping a piece of Margaret with me. She always said I put value in the wrong places. Maybe I was trying to prove her right one last time." Della was quiet. Then she said, very softly, "I think I am going to take the position. The Asheville one, not Charlotte." Reed smiled. It was the first time Della had seen him smile without anything held back behind it. That night, Reed drove home across the Bowen Bridge. The sun was setting on the French Broad. He pulled over for a moment on the shoulder. For the first time in 3 years, he thought about the future without it feeling like a betrayal of Margaret. A month later, the bank held a small community event in Pack Square. Not a press event, just an open afternoon for local clients, with coffee and cookies set out on folding tables. A small string trio played jazz standards near the fountain. Della spoke on behalf of the new leadership. She wore a dark blazer and held a single index card she did not look at. She kept it short. A community bank does not exist because of its assets. It exists because of the trust of the people who believe it will do the right thing. 6 weeks ago, we did the wrong thing to a customer. We cannot promise that will never happen again. We can only say that this time, somebody did not let it pass. And that is how we want to be measured from here on. There was a moment of quiet after she finished. Then a few people clapped. Then more. Pendergast, the 70-year-old co-founder, stood at the edge of the crowd and nodded once at her. He did not need to say anything else. Reed stood at the back of the crowd with Vera. He did not step forward. This was not his moment, and he knew the shape of his own moments well enough not to confuse them with anyone else's. Vera held his hand the entire time, watching Della at the microphone the way a child watches an adult she has decided to trust. After the event, Pearl Dawson found Reed. She handed him an old fountain pen black lacquer with a thin gold band. Margaret had left it on a counter in the bank in 2019, the day she came in to update an address. Pearl had kept it in a drawer all this time, in a small velvet pouch with a tag that read "Found Item, August." "I never knew who to give it back to," she said. "Now I do." Reed took the pen. His hand shook slightly. He thanked Pearl not with words, just a long nod and a hand on her shoulder. Pearl squeezed his arm and walked back into the crowd before he could see her eyes. Vera tugged at his hand and pointed toward Della, who was talking with a customer near the steps of the old bank building. Vera said the longest sentence Reed had heard her speak in 2 months. "Dad, can we ask Miss Della to come over for dinner? I want to show her Mom's drawing room." Reed knelt down to her level. He looked at his daughter for a long moment, at the careful, deliberate expression she had inherited from Margaret, at the way she held the question like she had been carrying it for a week and was finally setting it down. "Yes, baby. I'll ask her." He walked over to Della. She saw him approaching and finished her conversation. He asked simply, "Are you free Friday night? Vera wants you to come for dinner." "Vera does?" "Vera does." "I do too." Della nodded. She did not say anything else. She just touched Reed's hand for 1 second and then drew her own back. Friday evening, Reed's house on the hill above the French Broad. Della arrived at 6:30, carrying a bottle of wine and a new sketchbook for Vera. She stood at the door for a moment before she knocked. Vera opened the sketchbook immediately. Her eyes brightened. She pulled Della upstairs by the hand to show her the small room in the corner of the house, the one with the tall window facing the river, the room from Margaret's drawing. Reed had finished it the week before. He had not told Della. He had only told Vera. "This is the room your mother wanted to build for you." Vera had kept the secret, though she had checked on the room every night for 3 days to make sure it was still there. Della stood in the middle of the room. She looked at the window, looked at the drafting desk Reed had built from black walnut. The grain matched across the front. The chair was the right size for an 8-year-old. There was a cup of pencils on the desk, sharpened. She did not say anything. Reed stood in the doorway. Dinner was simple. Roast chicken, potatoes, salad. Vera spoke more than usual. At one point, she laughed at something Della said, and Reed turned away so Della would not see his eyes. After dinner, Vera went up to bed early. She had never done that on her own. Reed and Della went out to the porch. They sat in silence for a while. The river below, the lights of Asheville far in the distance. Della spoke first. "Reed, I do not know what this is, but I do not want to rush it." "Neither do I," he said. "I promised Margaret I would take care of Vera the best I could. I did not promise I would be alone forever, but I need time to know, and Vera needs time to know that this is right." Della nodded. "Then we have time." Reed put his hand on the porch railing. Della placed hers near his, not touching, but close enough that they both knew. Pearl Dawson came home from her shift. She called Della on her way. Her son's radiation results had come back well. The tumor was responding. The doctors were optimistic. Della listened on the porch. She hung up and turned to Reed. "Pearl has good news." Reed smiled. Sometimes everything arrives at once. They sat there until close to midnight. There was no kiss. There was no declaration, just 2 cups of coffee growing cold, and the sound of the river below, and the small, steady fact that neither of them had moved their hand away. 6 weeks ago, a carpenter in West Asheville set $300,000 in cash on a bank's table and was told not to waste their time. They did not know that the man in front of them was holding the very thing that kept them functional. They did not know that the plan to take his workshop had been written 4 years earlier by the same hand that signed the denial. Reed Halloran had never wanted them to know who he was. He only wanted to be measured for who he was. And sometimes, in a world built to measure people by what they own and what they show, that is the hardest thing a person can ask for.